It all started with a patch of mud. It's absurd, isn't it? Not a fight, not a late-night phone call, not a letter from the bank, but a simple clump of damp earth on my pristine kitchen linoleum. I saw it on a Tuesday morning as I was walking over to brew my customary Earl Grey tea. A dark, almost black tread mark from a boot that had no business being in my house was stamped on the light-colored tile with a defiant clarity. I stopped, my heart giving a strange, uneven lurch. My gardening clogs, the only shoes I own with a tread like that, always stay on the rubber mat by the back door. I follow that rule religiously. I hadn't had guests in a week. I live alone. Slowly, trying not to let the floorboards creak, I did a full sweep of the ground floor. The sliding glass door to the patio was secured with a double bolt. The front door was locked with a deadbolt David had installed back in the 90s. Every single window was latched from the inside. The alarm system, which my son Mark had insisted on after David passed, was glowing with a calm, reassuring green light. Everything was in order, except for that single, solitary print. It was a foreign artifact in the curated museum of my life. It was from a man's boot, a size 10, maybe, with a deep, aggressive tread pattern, like something a logger would wear. I got down on my knees, my joints protesting with a groan, and inspected it. It smelled of wet earth and something else, damp leaves. The scent of autumn invading the sterile air of my home. I wet a paper towel, scrubbed the mark away, then went over it with a sponge and cleaner, and, finally, wiped it dry. The square of linoleum shone like new. But even after the physical trace was gone, its phantom impression remained in my mind. An anomaly. A small, dirty crack in the foundation of my quiet, safe world. I didn't know it then, of course, but that muddy print wasn't just a fluke. It was the first word in a story I was about to be forced to decipher. A story written in betrayal and digital ink. Every life is a story, and you implicitly trust its narrator. I had always been the narrator of my own. I was about to find out my story had a ghostwriter, one who was editing my life with invisible keystrokes. And that muddy print was his first footnote in the margins of my carefully managed manuscript. Until that Tuesday, my life was like a perfectly organized library catalog. 40 years as the head librarian at the Denver Central Library had taught me the value of systems. The Dewey Decimal Classification was my religion. Retirement didn't change my nature, just the setting. I was up at 6, no alarm needed. Breakfast was oatmeal with blueberries and walnuts. From 7 to 8, I'd work in the garden. Wednesdays at 10 was my book club. We'd gather at my house, drink tea from my good china, and discuss the latest novel. This week, it was a thriller about family secrets, and Sheila, a widow for just over a year, said something that now feels prophetic. The most dangerous secrets are the ones hiding in plain sight. We all nodded in solemn agreement. On Fridays, I volunteered at the animal shelter. I didn't walk the dogs or clean cages. I read to them. I'd sit on the floor in the kennel with the most terrified, newly arrived dogs and, in a quiet voice, read Hemingway. They were especially attentive during The Old Man and the Sea. My late husband, David, would have chuckled at the sight, but I saw how the animals' tense bodies would relax at the sound of my voice, how their trembling would subside. I was giving them an illusion of peace. The world was predictable. My bills were paid automatically. My blood pressure medication was taken on schedule. And once a week, usually Sunday evening, the phone would ring. It would be Mark, my only son. He lived up in Boulder with his wife, Sarah, and my 2 grandchildren, Jake and Emily. His voice was my anchor. "Hey, Mom. How are you? Everything okay? Are you remembering to lock the doors?" His concern was a warm, familiar blanket against the drafts of the world. If my house is my fortress, my garden is its heart. David built the greenhouse in the backyard himself the year before his heart just stopped. He was an engineer, and it was built to last. Now, I grew his favorite beefsteak tomatoes and my Mr. Lincoln roses there. When I'd cut one of the deep red, velvety blooms, I always felt like I was saying hello to him. I knew every branch, every thorn. I fought off aphids with a homemade soap solution and nourished the soil with coffee grounds. It was my world, real, tangible. A world where effort yielded visible results. My neighbors, a young couple who worked in tech, lived in a different universe. Their lawn was managed by an app. A robot vacuum glided silently through their house. They had their meals delivered in pre-portioned boxes. They optimized life. I simply lived it, my hands in the dirt. Mark often teased me. Mom, it's 2025. There's an app for aphids, you know. He said it lovingly. He just didn't understand that for me. The value was in the process, not just the outcome. I valued the things that required effort. Perhaps that's why I fell so easily for what seemed like an effortless solution. They'd come for Sunday dinner last week. I made a pot roast, Mark's favorite. The house filled with noise and life. 14-year-old Jake was glued to his phone, while 11-year-old Emily showed me an animation she'd created on her tablet. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, looked exhausted. She's an ER nurse, and the strain of her job was etched around her eyes. We're having some trouble with the mortgage, Mark mentioned casually at the table after the kids had run outside. The bank raised the rate on our arm. It's legalized theft, is what it is. He said it calmly, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. I nodded sympathetically. Do you need some help, honey? I have my savings. He immediately held up a hand. No, Mom, absolutely not. We'll manage. It's just, the whole system is rigged. It's designed to squeeze every last drop out of you. He gave me his most disarming smile, the one I remembered from when he was 5. His eyes were completely sincere. I believed him. This was my son, a good man, tired of fighting a world that felt unjust. How could I not believe him? On Thursday, I had to go to the bank to withdraw some cash for my book club. I hated ATMs. Their impersonal screens and robotic voices filled me with a low-grade anxiety. I stood in line for a human teller, a pleasant young woman named Maria. When I got home, I opened my laptop to reply to an email from my cousin in Ohio. But the email server greeted me with a cold message. Your password has expired. For your security, please create a new one. I sighed. Passwords were my Achilles heel. I opened my special notebook where I kept them all recorded and began the process. The system demanded two-factor authentication. It sent a code to my phone. By the time I found my glasses to read the tiny digits, the code had expired. A second try. A third. Access temporarily blocked. I slammed the laptop shut with more force than I intended. I was hit by a wave of helpless fury, followed by a cold tide of fear. I was becoming incompetent. The world was growing more complex at an exponential rate, and I was an analog woman in a digital age. I felt like the invisible walls of technology were closing in, cutting me off from the world and turning me into a helpless child. That evening, as if on cue, Mark called. Hey, Mom, what's up? I unloaded my frustrations about the password. He listened patiently. Mom, how many times have I told you? Don't struggle with this stuff. Just call me. It's what I do. I'll fix it in 5 minutes. I don't want to bother you, I mumbled, feeling foolish. It's never a bother. Taking care of you is my job and my pleasure, he said. He paused. Listen, since we're on the subject. How are you doing your banking? Are you still going into the branch? Yes. I was just there today. Mom, that's so inefficient. And not very safe, walking around with cash. There are so many scammers out there who prey on people like you. Look, why don't I swing by on Saturday and get you all set up? We'll install the bank's app, get you on Zelle. It's super convenient and secure. You could send your friends money for lunch without leaving the house. I want you to be safe. He'd said the magic words, scammers and safe. He wasn't just offering convenience, he was offering protection. He wanted to build me a digital fortress. A profound sense of relief washed over me. The wall that had intimidated me was about to be torn down by his capable hands. Okay, honey, I said, my voice thick with gratitude. Come on over. On Saturday, he came alone. Fewer distractions, he smiled. We sat on the sofa, my laptop on his knees. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He reset my email password, created a new one with a complex mix of letters and symbols, and neatly wrote it down in my notebook. Then he picked up my phone. His confident movements were mesmerizing. He downloaded the bank's app, then Zelle. Okay, now we need to link your phone number. It's going to send you a code. Read it to me. I dutifully recited the 6 digits. His face was close to mine, and I could smell the familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne. Perfect. Now for a test. I'll send you $1 so you can see how it works. A second later, my phone made a pleasant little chime. A notification appeared. See? The money's there. Now, you send it back to me. It's safe, Mom. Safer than writing a check, because every transaction is encrypted. He guided my finger across the screen, showing me where to tap. At that moment, I felt a surge of such tenderness and pride that my eyes pricked with tears. This was my son. My support. My protector. He wasn't letting me get left behind. There you go, he said, logging out of everything. You're in the 21st century now, Mom. Perfectly safe. He kissed my cheek, drank a glass of water in the kitchen, and left. I sat in the quiet living room, holding my phone. It felt less like a cold piece of plastic and more like a warm talisman. I felt calm and light. A problem that had been tormenting me was solved. I believed my son had just built a high digital wall around me to keep the dangers of the world out. I had no idea he had just locked me inside it with the enemy. 5 days passed. 5 days of blissful ignorance, during which I felt competent and modern. I even bragged to Sheila from my book club about how my son had set up my online banking. I'm finally in the 21st century, I joked, and she was suitably impressed. That Thursday morning, we had plans to meet for lunch, and I decided it was the perfect opportunity to use my new skills. Sheila had paid for both of us last time, and I wanted to send her the $23 I owed her. A moment of small, private triumph. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and my phone. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dancing dust motes. I felt like the master of my domain. Confidently, I unlocked the screen and tapped the banking app icon. It opened, asking for my fingerprint. A second's delay, and the numbers appeared. My balance. The smile vanished from my face. I blinked. Then I blinked again. The numbers didn't change. $2,147. 18, it couldn't be. It simply could not be. Last week, when I was at the branch, it was just over $12,000. My pension, my social security, the money I had diligently saved for 40 years. My safety net. My peace of mind. It has to be a glitch, I thought. A bug in the app. Of course. These newfangled technologies are always buggy. I closed the app and reopened it. The same number stared back at me. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm sun. I felt the blood drain from my face, and the phone in my hand suddenly felt heavy and cold as a stone. The room seemed to sway. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Stay calm, Carol. There's a logical explanation for everything. My inner librarian was trying to impose order on the chaos, but panic was already rising from my stomach like bile. With trembling hands, I navigated to the transaction history section. I put on my reading glasses. The screen was too bright, the letters blurry. I forced my eyes to focus. And then I saw it. Line after line. Like neat little library cards, cataloging the destruction of my life. August 14th. Zelle payment to Mark Miller. $500. August 15th. Zelle payment to Mark Miller. $500. August 16th. Zelle payment to Mark Miller. $500. On and on. Every day. The maximum amount the daily limit would allow. Methodical. Relentless. I scrolled down and the list continued. The most recent transactions were for larger amounts. He must have called the bank to have the limit increased. I saw transfers for $1,500, then $2,000. I was trying to do the math in my head, but my brain refused to function. I opened the calculator app. I entered each amount, my fingers fumbling on the keypad. Finally, the total materialized on the screen. $9,800. $9,800. My mind went completely silent. It refused to process the information. It couldn't be Mark. My Mark. No, it was a mistake. Someone stole his phone. Someone hacked his account and was framing him. Yes, that was it. He was a victim, too. The thought brought a brief, desperate wave of relief. Of course. We would go to the police together. We would sort this out. I clung to that version of reality because the only alternative was unthinkable. It meant my entire world was a lie. I had to act. Immediately. I found the number for the bank's fraud department on their website. I took a deep breath and made the call. A robotic voice greeted me. Then came the music. A bland, synthetic melody designed to drive you insane. It played for 7 minutes. 7 endless minutes as I stared at the numbers on my laptop screen, panic tightening its icy grip around my throat. Finally, a click. Thank you for holding. My name is Brenda. How can I assist you? Her voice was tired and indifferent. My own voice cracking, I tried to explain. I told her about my son, about setting up the app, about the missing money. I repeated it like a mantra. My son would never do this. His account must have been compromised. This is fraud. Brenda was silent for a moment, the sound of her typing echoing in the background. 1 moment, ma'am. 2 more minutes of musical torture. Okay, Mrs. Miller, I'm seeing the transactions now. All Zelle payments. They were authorized from your device using your password and confirmed with codes sent to your registered phone number. But I didn't authorize them. I mean, my son was with me, he was setting it all up. Ma'am, her voice turned cold and official. Did you provide someone with access to your device and your security credentials? It was my son. I nearly shouted. Ma'am, from the bank's perspective, that is immaterial. Zelle payments are like handing someone cash. They were authorized. We are seeing no signs of a security breach on your account. We can, of course, open an internal investigation, but I must advise you that in 99% of cases, authorized payments are considered final and are non-refundable. The word authorized hit me like a physical blow. I had authorized it. I had given him the keys to the vault. I had let the thief into my house myself. I mumbled a thank you and hung up. The lifeline I'd been clinging to was a stone. There was one last hope. I had to hear his voice. I had to hear him say, in a panic, Mom, I've been hacked. We have to do something. My fingers could barely tap his name in my contacts. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The line rang. Once. Twice. Hey, Mom. His voice was nauseatingly normal, cheerful. How's it going? Getting the hang of the new tech? Ice filled my lungs. I could hardly breathe. Mark, I whispered. The money. There's money missing from my account. Silence. It only lasted a second, but in that second, an entire universe died. The universe where I trusted my son. Then his voice changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, irritated metal. I knew you'd notice. I was going to tell you. I closed my eyes. The floor fell away from me. It's a loan, Mom. Just a loan, he started talking, the words tumbling out in a rush. I got into some trouble. I needed the cash fast. This project at work, it fell through. And the credit card debt. Sarah doesn't know, I didn't want to worry her. I'll pay it all back. Every cent. With interest. I didn't know what else to do. You would have just lectured me. He went on and on. Excuses. Justifications. He was painting himself as the victim of circumstance. There was not a shred of remorse. Not a hint of an apology. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was explaining why he'd been entitled to do it. I don't remember ending the call. I think I just pressed the button in the middle of his sentence. The phone fell from my numb hand onto the rug. The silence in the house was deafening. Every object seemed to mock me. The chair he'd sat in. The glass he'd drunk from. It was all tainted. It wasn't about the money. God, if he had asked, I would have given it to him. It was about the how. Secretly. Methodically. While looking me in the eye and talking about love and safety. He hadn't stolen my money. He had stolen my past. 40 years of memories, of love and pride, all of it was poison now. I felt sick. I stumbled to the sofa and curled into a ball, wrapping my arms around myself. I was shaking, not from cold, but from a deep, profound shame. What a fool I'd been. A blind, trusting old fool. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, as my mind replayed the last few weeks, now illuminated by a hideous new light. Every innocent gesture now seemed sinister. His complaints about the mortgage. his insistence on helping, his talk about security. That muddy boot print, was that him, sneaking in to check something on my laptop? The thought of him entering my house in secret was almost as sickening as the theft itself. My home was no longer a safe place. My memories were no longer a safe place. Sometime before dawn, as the sky began to lighten, the grief and shame started to burn away. In their place, something new began to smolder. Anger. A cold, hard, heavy anger. Fury at him, for his betrayal. Fury at the bank, for their soulless indifference. Fury at the world, for writing me off as a helpless old woman who could be cheated without consequence. They all expected me to cry, to accept it, to keep quiet because it was a family matter. They expected me to break. And in that moment, watching the sunrise, I decided I would not break. I got off the sofa. My bones ached. I took a shower, got dressed, and made the strongest coffee I could stomach. I sat at my laptop. My hands were steady now. I am a librarian. My weapon is information. And I was about to arm myself to the teeth. I didn't start with Google. I went to the online databases of legal journals that I still had access to as a retired library employee. I searched for precedents. Electronic Fund Transfer Act. Regulation E. Bank liability in P2P transactions. I opened the Colorado Attorney General's website, the Consumer Complaints section. Then the federal site for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB. I read stories. Hundreds of them, just like mine. And in almost all of them, the people gave up. But a few didn't. I took out a new notebook, not for passwords, but for war. I began to document everything. The date and time of my call to the bank. The agent's name, Brenda. My notes from the conversation. I printed my bank statements and highlighted every fraudulent transaction. I was building a case. My case. By noon, I understood the landscape. The system was designed to make you surrender. It was a labyrinth of rules and denials meant to exhaust you. A frontal assault was impossible. I had to attack from the flanks and from above. A complaint to the Attorney General. A complaint to the CFPB. That would create external pressure. But it wasn't enough. I needed something more. Proof that this wasn't a family dispute over money, but a calculated act of fraud that exploited a vulnerability. The idea came to me then, sharp and clear. Mark had said I didn't know what else to do. He was lying. He knew exactly what to do, which meant he had learned how somewhere. The internet. Forums. Social media. He had left a trail. I was sure of it. But how could I find it? I was not a detective. I stared at my old, worn-out address book on the shelf. A real one, made of paper. My eyes stopped on a name I hadn't thought of in years. Henderson, Shirley, and Frank. We had been family friends when Mark was a boy. Frank had been a cop, and after he retired, he opened a small private investigation firm. We hadn't seen them in 20 years. I found the number. My heart began to beat faster, but this time it was not from fear. It was from resolve. I dialed. Hello, a woman's voice answered. Shirley? My own voice was calm, cold, and clear. It's Carol Miller. I know it's been a long time. Carol. My goodness, how are you? I'm all right, Shirley. I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this. I have a business question. Tell me, is Frank still running his agency? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I knew how strange my request must have sounded. But the helpless, weeping victim I had been yesterday was gone. In her place was a woman with a plan. We met at the Three Sisters, an old coffee shop that smelled of cinnamon and burnt coffee, a place where time seemed to have stopped in the 1970s. Frank Henderson hadn't aged so much as condensed. He was a more concentrated version of the man I remembered. Short gray hair, a face mapped with the wrinkles of long shifts and too much cynicism, and eyes that had seen it all and weren't impressed. He still drank his coffee black. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I opened my notebook on the sticky tabletop. Frank, I need your help, I said, my voice as steady as if I were requesting a book from the archives. This isn't a family squabble. This is a case. He listened without interruption as I laid out the facts, dates, amounts, my conversations with the bank and with Mark. I spoke without emotion, without tears. I was a client presenting a problem. When I finished, he stirred his cold coffee for a long time. Family stuff is always messy, Carol, he said quietly. What's your endgame here? Do you want to put him in jail? The question hung in the air. A part of me did. But the thought of my grandchildren, of Sarah, of the final, public annihilation of what was left of my family, held me back. No, I said. I don't want him in jail. I want leverage. I want indisputable proof that this wasn't an act of desperation, but a premeditated plan. I need his digital footprint. I know he has one. But I don't know how to find it. Frank sighed. David would have my hide for this, he muttered, looking out the window. He was so proud of that kid. David would have demanded justice, I countered. He looked back at me, and I saw a flicker of the old cop in his eyes, a flicker of professional curiosity. My logic and lack of hysteria had convinced him more than any tears could have. This will cost you, Carol. I'll pay it, I said. Consider it an investment in settling the accounts. He nodded slowly, a hint of respect in his gaze. He saw not a grieving mother, but a determined adversary. All right, Carol. I'll look into it. But be prepared. What I find might be uglier than you can imagine. Frank, I met his eyes. It can't possibly get any uglier. The next 3 weeks were a slow-motion torture of waiting. By day, I waged my own war. I sat at my computer and methodically, painstakingly, filled out the official complaint forms with the Colorado Attorney General's office and the federal CFPB. I described the situation in dry, legalistic terms, attaching scans of bank statements and call logs. Each click of the submit button was a small act of defiance. At night, the silence was broken by his attempts to breach my defenses. I had blocked his number, but his voicemails still came through. They began with feigned remorse. Then they shifted to irritation. The last one I listened to was a masterpiece of selfish indignation. Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're tearing this family apart. Over some money you weren't even using. Sarah is a wreck, the kids can feel it. Stop this crusade and just pick up the phone. I deleted the message. My life was already in ruins. I was simply building a barricade from the rubble. I stopped going to my book club. I couldn't bear the sympathetic looks. I was in isolation, but it was the isolation of a soldier in a foxhole, lonely, terrifying, but filled with purpose. Frank called 3 weeks and 1 day later. Carol, I've got something. Same place. This time, he brought a thin folder. He slid it across the table without a word. Inside were printouts from a Reddit forum, in a section called r/personal finance. A user with a screen name DenverDad85 had started a discussion thread months ago. The title was, How to Convince a Boomer Relative to Help with Debt. I read, and the air left my lungs. It was him. The details matched: his job, 2 kids, the minor mortgage trouble. He framed me as an out-of-touch old woman sitting on a pile of cash she doesn't even need. Then came the comments. Advice from other anonymous users. And then, the jewel. A step-by-step guide. Your Trojan horse is IT support, one user had written. Offer to help with their online banking. Set up Zelle. That's the key. They don't understand how it works. Start siphoning off small amounts, the daily limit. They won't even notice. If they do, call it a loan. Play the guilt card. You're their kid. They'll make noise, but they'll forgive you. The main thing is to act concerned. Talk about security, about scammers. Use their fear against them. It was his playbook. Word for word. My tragedy was just a script he downloaded from the internet. I looked up at Frank. My eyes were dry. Thank you, Frank, I said. This is exactly what I needed. At home, I laid the printouts on my kitchen table. The puzzle was complete. This wasn't just evidence, it was the anatomy of a crime. On a clean page in my notebook, I wrote options. 1. Police. 2. Lawsuit. 3. Confrontation. I knew then that I didn't want a judge in a robe to pass sentence. I wanted his wife to be the judge and jury. My goal wasn't to imprison his body, it was to obliterate his web of lies. My email to him was brief and clinical. Subject: meeting. Body: Mark. We need to meet. This Friday, 3 p.m. at your Chase Bank branch on Pearl Street. Sarah's attendance is required. They came. Mark was pale and fidgety. Sarah looked confused and annoyed. I had reserved a glass-walled conference room in the middle of the lobby. A fishbowl. I was dressed in my best suit. I was the picture of calm. "Thank you for coming," I said as they sat. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I opened my briefcase and began to lay out documents like cards. First, the bank statement. $9,800. Next, the copies of the official complaints. "These are formal fraud investigations, Sarah," I explained. "They can have serious consequences." "Are you insane?" Mark sputtered. "You hired a PI? You're trying to ruin my life." "Your life was ruined by Denver Dad 85, I said, and slid the Reddit printouts across the table, placing them directly in front of Sarah. "I suggest you read this. It's a very detailed script." I watched Sarah's face as she read. I saw disbelief morph into dawning comprehension, then into horror, and finally, into a deep, glacial contempt. She slowly raised her head and looked at her husband as if he were a complete stranger. And in that look, I saw the end of their marriage, the end of his world. He wasn't defeated by my anger, but by her silent, hollow gaze. "Here are my terms," I said into the suffocating silence. "They are non-negotiable. 1. You will go to a loan officer right now and take out a personal loan for $10,500. $9,800 is what you stole. The rest covers my expenses. You will transfer the full amount to my account before we leave this building." You should appreciate the irony of using Zelle. He started to protest, but a look from Sarah silenced him. 2. I continued, you will give me all login information for my accounts. 3. I will withdraw the complaints only after the money is in my account. And 4. All communication between us ends indefinitely. I will arrange to see my grandchildren through Sarah if she permits it. We sat in silence while he meekly signed the loan documents. Then, with trembling fingers, he sent the money from his phone. A pleasant little chime sounded from mine. The notification. The money was back. A month has passed. The silence from Mark is absolute. Sarah sends pictures of the kids. And I found a new purpose. After seeing another woman in a senior's Facebook group post about being scammed by a relative, I knew I had to act. I turned on my laptop's camera. "Hello," I said, looking directly into the lens. "My name is Carol, and I'm 68 years old. Today, I want to talk to you about digital hygiene." I didn't tell my story. I told their story. I explained the methods, the technology, the psychology of the scam. I was a librarian again, organizing information to empower people. I posted the video. The response was overwhelming. "Thank you. The same thing happened to me. You are so brave." My pain had become a shield for others. This morning, I was in my garden, pruning my Mr. Lincoln roses. My phone chimed. It was a message from the woman who had inspired the video. "Carol, because of your advice, I challenged the bank, and they refunded my money. You changed my life." I put the phone down. There was no elation in my heart, just a quiet, aching sadness. Justice, I realized, isn't a happy ending. You can't restore what's been broken. Trust and love can't be refunded. Justice is simply balancing the ledger. It's the act of closing one chapter and earning the right to write the next one yourself. I clipped a perfect, dark red rose and breathed in its scent. It was both bitter and sweet. The ending to my story wasn't happy, but it was mine.